G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to show you how you can eliminate calf tightness for good. Now, in order to do that, we obviously need to go through a couple of different exercises to help you release those tight calves. But then we need to follow that up with a really important adult conversation around why those calves are tight in the first place and why they're consistently staying tight and not just going away. Because we know the baseline for the human body isn't tight and stiff. It's loose and free and strong. So if you have tight calves and you feel like you've had tight calves forever, there has to be a reason why those muscles are tight. And we want to touch on that as we go through the video. So the way that I want to structure this, we're going to go through 3 exercises. 2 of them are going to be calf muscle specific. One's going to be ankle joint specific because that plays a really important role in why a calf muscle is tight. And then we're actually going to go through a lower back exercise. And look, if you've been subscribed to the channel, if you follow the channel, you'll understand that there's a very strong connection between low back dysfunction and calf muscle tightness. That clinically what I find is that by releasing some certain parts of the low back, it takes a lot of the tension out of the sciatic nerve that goes down through that calf muscle and potentially asks it to be tight in the first place. So if we want to keep that calf muscle loose, we also need to look at your lower back. And then after that, we're going to talk about one of the most important factors that you have to address, you have to be aware of if you want to avoid those calf muscles tightening back up again. So if you're happy to stay through and watch the video, hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a really clear understanding of what I find works really well clinically in freeing up a calf muscle and stopping it from wanting to retighten going forward. So before we get to all that, obviously, if you could consider leaving a like rating on the video down below if you find it helpful. If you find it genuinely insightful and useful, and it really does help you, it fills a need that you've been looking to fill over a long period of time, please consider leaving a super thanks donation down below as well, which is a great way to help support me and the channel. And then obviously in the comments down below, let me know what's going on with your calves. Is it something that you have had for the longest time, as long as you can remember that your calves have always been tight? Is it something that's just the thing that you would like to get rid of just so that you can function a little bit better, or you're looking to learn a little bit more about it in general? Let me know down below so that I can get some feedback on this video. With that being said, the first thing I want to talk about is why our calves are tight in the first place. And then hopefully with this information, and I'll timestamp the exercises down below if you want to jump straight to those, but this is really important contextually to understand, because if we don't have this in the back of our minds while we're stretching our calf muscles, we're never going to break that constant cycle of loosening, retightening, loosening and retightening. So for me personally, and what I find clinically, there's 2 factors that potentially ask our calves to be tight in the first place. The first one is the most important one. So if you're going to take anything away from this video, this is the most important point to understand. The number 1 cause of calf tightness that I find revolves around your footwear or your choice of footwear. Now, I don't have a shoe at hand. I should have got one for this video, but heeled shoes and flip-flops or thongs are easily the worst things that you can wear if you don't want your calves to be tight. And the reason for that is very simple. From a heel perspective, so we're not just talking about women's heeled shoes, but any shoe, and most shoes these days, even kids' shoes, business shoes, sneakers or runners, doesn't matter what shoe you put on your foot, if it has a heel at the back relative to the sole at the front, the exact amount of heel at the back of your shoe is the exact amount of ankle range you don't have access to while you're in that shoe. So if you're in that shoe for any length of time during the day, or even if it's a short amount of time, but you're in it consistently throughout the day, you don't gain access to that deeper ankle range, so you lose it. You're not consistently putting those calf muscles through their normal range while you're standing or moving, so your body starts to render that less important. You don't use it, so you lose it, as the saying goes. So if we're stretching your calf muscles and mobilizing your ankle joint, which we'll get to, and you're consistently putting yourselves back into the same shoes, it's very hard to see how you're going to make progress long term, because you're consistently asking things to be a certain way without breaking that cycle. Now, in terms of flip-flops and thongs, it's a little bit different, because as soon as you add a piece of material in between your big toe and your second toe, you completely change the dynamic of how your foot works, because it has to hold that onto your foot. We all know how hard it is to kick a football or run or walk backwards in a pair of thongs or flip-flops. The reason being is because you can easily kick them off your feet because it's hard to hold on to that with your foot. Now, by holding onto that with your foot, with your toes, the arch dynamic changes, the ankle dynamic changes. So it becomes very hard for your ankle to express itself normally, and the calf muscle flows into that really well. So again, if you're wearing heeled shoes, if you're jumping into thongs all the time, particularly during the summer weather or the hot weather, then again, it's very easy to accumulate calf tightness because of that very simple fact. So if you're someone who wants to move beyond calf tightness, we've got to get you to progress down to flatter shoes. And again, I'll put a video out on this in a little bit more, just so it's a bit clearer about how to do that. But then also we want to move away from thongs or flip-flops into more of a self-securing sandal, or a sandal that sort of sits over the top of your foot a little bit more. It's not perfect, but it's a better option than a thong or a flip-flop. Now, the second part of this conversation in terms of what causes calf tightness and ankle restriction is, believe it or not, sitting. Sitting is one of the worst things that we can do for our body from a musculoskeletal perspective. Being stuck in the same shape day after day for hours potentially, doesn't matter what activity you're doing, sitting is a central theme throughout a lot of those things, whether it's sitting on the couch, driving a car, using a laptop or computer, doing something at work. It doesn't really matter what it is, we're often in the same shapes consistently. And the interesting thing about sitting is, as I said briefly at the start of the video, there is a connection to the low back that I'm finding clinically that relates to calf issues. But the simple fact is that when we're sitting in this sort of hip and knee 90-degree position, so again, it's obviously, I'm at a different angle here, but imagine that I'm sitting comfortably at a computer here. We're also keeping our feet at 90 degrees throughout that position a lot as well. So same deal, if our foot's stuck at 90 degrees for hours on end without really exploring those deeper ranges, then that tissue that's used or stretched or engaged in those deeper ranges doesn't have the same capacity to be used. So again, we tend to lose it over time. So if you're in less than ideal footwear and you spend a lot of time sitting, it's very easy to accrue a whole bunch of calf tightness consistently. So again, as I said, for the purpose of this video, if you're not taking steps to hopefully recognize that and hopefully change that, then it's very hard for your calves to completely loosen up and stay loose forever, which is obviously the goal of this video. So I'll get to the low back connection when we get to that exercise, but the important thing is to remember those ideas. Footwear and sitting are really nasty for calf tightness, and these exercises are only going to be super effective long term. They'll be hopefully very effective short term. You'll see hopefully you'll see a really strong change really quickly, but long term it relies on a broader conversation around what you're doing day to day with your shoes and obviously sitting related habits. So getting into the exercises, the first exercise that I want to go through is an ankle mobility exercise. So we'll leave the two calf exercises for a second, but one of the main reasons why a calf muscle tends to be tight is it tends to go along with an ankle that's restricted. So again, if you're just stretching ankle muscles, calf muscles, whether it's your gastrocs or your soleus, and you're not mobilizing the ankle joint, then you're not allowing those muscles to express themselves through that full ankle range because you've only got a limited ankle range to work in. It's hard for that calf muscle to be completely loose, or those calf muscles to be completely loose if the joint that they function alongside isn't loose itself. And again, if you've been a subscriber to the channel, if you're a fan of the channel, you will have seen this exercise before. It's the banded ankle stretch. It's genuinely one of the best exercises to mobilize an ankle that I've ever seen as a physio. What you basically need is a power band, and I'll link this in the description if you want to grab one. For me personally, I find it works best if the band is above the ankle. You'll see the majority of people on the internet will possibly put the band below the ankle because of arthrokinematics and the way that the joint functions. But for me, I actually find I get better results when it's just above the ankle. And the reason for that is when we stretch the band out as far as you feel comfortable, and then you step through with the other foot, when we bend that ankle as far as possible, we're putting it into a position of restriction. So this is as far as my ankle goes. And by adding some tension to the band, I'm biasing the joint and the joint capsule to really mobilize that joint capsule in a position of restriction. And I find that by pulling back on the tibia, on the tib and fib at the base of the ankle, it really helps free up the capsule that I'm looking to target much better than if the band is lower down underneath the ankle there. So again, you can try both yourself to see which one feels best for you, but we want to step out as far as we feel comfortable, bend that ankle as far as you feel comfortable. Now the key with this exercise basically that I think a lot of people miss is that if you have some ankle stiffness, your knee will most often want to dump inwards to go around that stiffness to go a little bit further. What I want you to do here is I want to make sure that that knee stays out. So we want to go out and rotate out as far as you feel comfortable to really bias that hidden restriction in the ankle. But obviously we want to do it with the band facing backwards here. So again, stay here for 30 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever you feel comfortable doing. And then what you'll hopefully find is immediately that ankle should feel a little bit more mobile than it did before. So the banded ankle stretch that goes after the capsular restriction in the ankle is a hugely important piece of the puzzle if you now want the calf muscles to have a chance to free up quickly. Having said that, your ability to move should be better immediately after doing that, but do it as much as you feel comfortable, as often as you feel comfortable, until you stop making change with that exercise. Now, exercise number 2 is a calf stretch. This isn't a very tricky exercise, it's a very simple one. You can do this a number of different ways, but how I like to do this is I like to have my foot up against a wall or a door frame, whatever you feel you've got. I want to try and get my heel as close to the wall as possible and really tension that up first. Then by holding onto something, we can get you to bring your hip closer to the wall as far as you feel comfortable and go looking for some tightness, either sort of more towards the outside, the inside, or the middle of that calf. Then what I want you to do here is you can rotate your leg around in one direction or the other to bias where in that calf you feel you need the most help with the exercise. So for me, for example, if I'm rotating inwards, I'll feel it more in the inner calf a little bit. But when I rotate outwards, I feel more sort of apparent calf tightness on the outside, or the lateral head of that gastroc feels a little bit tighter. So the way we want to do this is find the position that works best for you. Bring your hip close to the wall. Now what I want you to do here is we know, and again, if you've been a subscriber to the channel, you'll know this, we know that regular stretching doesn't work. Just holding this position isn't enough to make a genuine change for that tissue to give and release. So what we want to get you to do here is we want to get you to tense the area that feels tight. So push your toes, push the ball of your foot back into the wall, try and tense up the area that you feel is tight. Hold that for 10 seconds and then release. You should feel like you can go a little bit further immediately. Now this is one of the best ways to mobilize a restricted calf. It's a PNF stretch, or a contract relax stretch. It engages the muscular tightness so that when you relax that muscular tightness, the muscular tightness gives. So we want to do this 2 or 3 times, or as often as you feel you can, until you stop making progress. And then what we can do, because this is more of a gastroc stretch, we can bend your knee a little bit and repeat the same process. Now you're going to find that this is going to work a little bit lower down towards that soleus area. Again, you want to rotate around to find where your best tightness is. Come up to the wall, tense that for 5 to 10 seconds, relax, come further again, tense that for 5 to 10 seconds, relax. Keep repeating that until you stop seeing progress. Now, those 2 exercises alone can reshape how your calf feels in a very short amount of time. One hits the hidden joint capsular restriction. The other one goes after the actual muscular tightness of your gastroc and your soleus muscles. The third thing that I want to touch on with this is more of like a soft tissue, connective tissue thing. So in that calf muscle, there can be some adhesions and some restrictions, whether it's some neural flossing issues, whether it's some fascial restrictions, whatever it may be. So it really pays to have a foam roller, or in this instance, a drink bottle or a flask. What we want to get you to do is we're going to do the stereotypical calf rolling without actually rolling. So again, if you're a fan of the channel, you'll know this. We don't like rolling around on things, although you can if you feel like it does help you. What I like to do instead is I like to find a spot that feels a little bit restricted. So again, I'm going to move it around until I hit a spot. So here feels a little bit tight for me, feels a little bit tender. I'm going to put a little bit of pressure through that. And instead of rolling, trying to grind that tissue away, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to try and shear that tissue free by bending and flexing my foot. Now this can be tender, so please go as hard or as soft as you feel comfortable. And if it is sore, please rely on your breathing. So some deep, slow breaths can really help take the edge off the exercise. But what I want to get you to do is put enough pressure on it that you feel comfortable, then try and shear that tissue free through the roller or the flask, whatever you've got lying around. Go in as many different directions with your foot until you feel like it's a little bit less tender, a little bit less restricted. Then move it around and find the next thing, and so on and so forth. Now, freeing this up can be a really great way to feed some slack into the calf muscle, free everything up, and help that move a lot better. Now, as I was saying before, ankle mobility, calf muscle mobility, fascial restrictions, those three exercises are really, really good at improving how free that tissue is. Coupling that with footwear choices and sitting awareness, you can really start to pick out a lot of the reasons for why those handbrakes are there in the first place. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here, and this one is often it feels the most strange for a lot of people when we talk about this clinically, because your calf muscle is literally down here, your low back's all the way up here, and for the lay person, it can be very hard to reconcile that connection between your low back and your calf muscle if your low back isn't itself a problem or painful to begin with. What a lot of people do tend to understand is if you do have low back pain and say you have sciatica, a lot of people do see that connection where the calf muscle feels really sore, it may feel painful, it may feel tight. But when there's an absence of back pain and something like sciatica, we don't tend to give it the same credit, even though that connection can still exist at a much lower severity, a much lower intensity. So this isn't to say that if you have calf muscle tightness, that you have a low back problem. You may not. But if you have some subtle low back joint restrictions or some subtle tightnesses in that low back, it can still feed into that same mechanism that expresses itself through a channel that's already there and can end up in your calf being tight. So again, if you're going through all of this and your calf muscle still feels tight, it's very, very important to go exploring through your lower back to see what is there to help free that up, feed some slack back into that area from the top, essentially. So again, we love a lacrosse ball for anything spinal mobility related. What I want you to do with the ball is generally the calf muscle relates to the bottom few sections of your lower back. So if you start right down the base, pop the ball right where the bump is at the middle, and then just let it roll straight off onto the fleshy part. There's muscles either side of the spine, but underneath those muscles are where the spinal joints are, where the nerves come from, particularly the sciatic nerve, the branches of that nerve that form the sciatic nerve that go down and supply that calf. So what we're going to get you to do is, as always, we just want you to lie down on the ball, and similar to the rolling exercise, or the roller exercise, we don't want you to roll around. We just want you to find a spot in your back that feels a little bit stiff, tight, or potentially tender. And we want to let you to let the ball press into that to allow it to free up and mobilize that tissue. So again, I found a spot here that feels a little bit tender, a little bit restricted. I then want to compare that to the same spot on the other side. And for me, my left-hand side, or the side closest to the camera, tends to be a little bit more restricted, a little bit more dense, a little bit tighter than this right-hand side. So even if you have one calf that tends to be tighter than the other, say if my right-hand side, my right calf was the tight one, but I feel like all the restrictions at the left side of my lower back, that's where we need to put the ball, because your body doesn't necessarily care about left and rights. It just cares about the low back as a whole. So if you've got some symptoms on one side, it'll pull slack from anywhere around it, and that can feed into both sides. So again, you can lift your bottom up a little bit to really get some extra pressure here. But essentially all we're doing is trying to free up the origins of some potential calf tightness all the way up at your lower back. Stay here for 30 seconds, a minute, whatever you feel you need to do. Have the TV on, get your phone out, do whatever. Once you've had enough of that, then move the ball down a little bit lower, and then hunt around for the spots that you feel are relevant and interesting. And then again, once you've done that, you should feel like your calf either feels a little bit less tender or a little bit loose than what it did before. So please make sure that when you're doing these exercises, that as soon as you stand up or as soon as you move around again, they genuinely feel like they've done something. They're not worth doing if you're not getting the instant results that we want. Obviously, the full benefit comes after doing these for a while, but you still deserve to see a little bit of some little progress immediately to really make you feel like you're doing something worthwhile. So I really hope that wasn't too long to start with, but again, I'll leave the timestamps and the chapters down below so you can skip backwards and forwards if you need to. But from what I find personally, clinically, if you're looking to solve muscle tightness, you have to have a conversation surrounding why that muscle is tight in the first place. And often it's something more random than just overuse or weakness and things like that. It's often a mechanical thing that starts somewhere else, and that's just something that's been asked to join in the conversation when it shouldn't. It should be left out entirely. So if you can free up your ankle, mobilize your calf in whatever way you feel comfortable, keep an eye on your lower back, keep that nice and loose, make good choices with your footwear, good choices around your sitting habits in terms of time and positions particularly, then it's very realistic to make sure that that calf muscle loosens up quickly and stays loose forever. Now that may seem like a lot of work just for a calf muscle, but it's the same broad conversation that we have, whether it's a quadriceps muscle, a hamstring muscle, a glute muscle, a chest muscle, whatever it might be. The central themes to this video stand up for all those different muscle groups as well, because there has to be a reason why this tightness is there. And if we're not having this conversation, then obviously it's hard to understand why that's there and you can't get rid of it. So with all that being said, I really hope that was helpful. I hope that was insightful. If it was, let me know. Leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe. Super thanks if you're up for it. But please share this around if you know someone who has tight calves that might find this useful. That being said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.